dude.
All right, so this is our 104 group project on Pier 34, Philadelphia by Jacob Cimini, Harrison Wentworth, Ethan Lopez, myself, and Palmer Bonebrake. All right, so what exactly happened? On May 18th, 2000, Pier 34 collapsed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On that pier was a nightclub that had 3 women inside that ended up meeting their end when the pier came down. Not only were there 3 deaths, but many were injured as well when the 91-year-old pier fell into the Delaware River. These are the 3 victims right here. So Pier 34, South Wentworth was located on the Philadelphia bank of the Delaware River, just south of Penn's Landing. It was originally built in 1909 on piles with a concrete structure supporting concrete retaining walls with solid fill and wood block paving, designed to carry loads of up to 500 pounds per square foot. So the cause for the collapse, apparently it was a long time coming. A study done in the late 1970s by the Philadelphia Department of Commerce determined that the Pier 34 had a low capacity of 500 pounds per square foot and an estimated useful life of 12 years or up until 1990. A Hayden City reporter wrote several years back that he remembered seeing a mat covering up a crack in the floor on the deck just a few days before the pier fell into the river. The crack apparently grew from 2 to 3 inches wide to a foot wide the day of the collapse itself. The owners of the pier were informed that more than $1.2 million in repairs were needed to replace some 600 pilings. But instead of replacing the pilings, the owners installed cheap braces that were inadequate to actually hold up the pier. Both the owner of the pier and the manager of the club had been warned repeatedly for weeks that the pier was shifting and apparently did nothing to remedy the situation. The owner of the property and the manager of the nightclub on the pier were later criminally charged for failure to maintain and repair its foundation. Continued on, the problem was that the pine poles supporting the structure had failed about 2/3 out into the Delaware. The pier was already years past its estimated lifespan. Moreover, 180 feet of the Pier 34 had already collapsed into the river in 1994. This failure was hastily patched up the following year, but the repair was clearly insufficient as the piles continued to move into the river. As you can see right here, this is the aftermath of the nightclub falling into the river.
History of Pier 34. The Philadelphia and Reading Railway had built Pier 34 in 1909 for use in loading coal on the ships. More than 2,500 yellow pine piles, 18 inches in diameter, were driven 50 to 70 feet into the riverbed. A wooden deck sat atop the piles and supported 8 feet of fill dirt with pavement on top surrounded by a concrete seawall. Pier 34 was constructed to support a train track across its length, as well as to withstand bumps from ships in the river. The pavement was then covered with a metal shed. In the 1930s, the pier was open to other shippers, but was still owned by the Reading Railroad. Indeed, much of the Philadelphia waterfront around the vicinity was controlled by the Reading at this time. Independent pier companies also used this wharf. Need the next one. All right, history of the pier continued. Prior to its collapse in 2000, the pier had suffered damages that comprised its structure integrity. In 1955, a barge collided with the pier, causing a significant amount of damage. And in 1994, there was a partial collapse that had to be repaired. 1984, a developer purchased the pier for $850,000. And in 1992, a man named Eli Cartney opened the nightclub at the end of the pier called Ellie's Nightclub. A few years later, in 1995, an investor lent Cartney's company $500,000 to perform repairs on the pier. However, there was no clear evidence that the money was ever used to perform the appropriate repairs. The company that bought the nightclub chose to dock a floating restaurant at the end of the pier and expanded its operations by adding a restaurant and ballroom onto an already unstable pier. Next. All right, this is a picture of the pier, a picture of Pier 34. The day it collapsed, or this picture is supposed to represent like the day it collapsed, and we see that the seawall is cracked. The piling supporting the pier are out of alignment. As previously stated, there was a crack in the floor that the owners tried to hide with the floor mat. According to the Deputy License and Inspection Commissioner, David Pier, said that cracks in the pier surface and the destruction of the seawall on the night of the collapse indicated that the pier's 2,500 timber piles, which looked like a forest of telephone poles, had fallen out of alignment. Rescue efforts were complicated by strong river currents, a lack of light, and the abundance of debris, and additional threats of collapse from the pier sections still standing. Next. Continued. During the investigation, it came out that there were numerous safety violations and fire code violations. Prior to the collapse, Michael Asbell, owner of the pier, hired Marine Construction Corp to inspect the pier. During the collapse, the report noted that sections of the club were showing settlements and movements inside the ballroom building. Commerce President Terry Zettel stated that one of his employees told Asbell and Eli Cartney, the manager of the nightclub, just hours before the collapse, that the structure could collapse in several tides. Several days after the collapse, the City Department of License and Inspections published a report that indicated the club had violated 3 minor fire codes in 1999. All reports indicated that the owner knew all of this prior to the collapse. In these pictures here, we see like pretty much just the devastation of this collapse and the loss of lives from this collapse and negligence.
All right, so evidence showed that neither Aspel or Cartney did anything to prevent the collapse, despite having known the issues with the pier for years. Both men were subsequently brought up on criminal charges to include third-degree murder charges, but the jury was unable to come to a unanimous decision, and wanting to avoid another trial, both men pled guilty and were sentenced to 9 months house arrest and 1,000 hours of community service. In late 2003, the families of the 3 women that died sued the owners for $29 million, with each estate being awarded $7.4 million in a civil lawsuit. And then right after the collapse in June of 2000, the city of Philadelphia ordered all of the owners of the privately owned piers to conduct a private investigation at a cost of $10,000 each to ensure the safety of the remaining piers. Next. And negligent disregard for safety can and will lead to disaster. Knowingly disregarding safety is a crime and it will be punished. So the biggest takeaway here is to listen to the expert recommendations. They were told several times that the pier was unsafe and that it was likely to collapse. They disregarded all of that information and it did collapse. So it could easily have been prevented.
I believe that's it.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our presentation.